Hello everybody, and today we celebrate a milestone for my YouTube channel. Today we celebrate my channel gaining 50,000 subscribers. It's only taken me 13 years to get here. At this rate, I'll have my 1,000 subscriber silver award button by... well, that's disappointing. So to celebrate, I've decided to make this special video. We have a map video for my new Railway Series universe, but let's talk about the most important part about the island of Sodor, its engines. I've decided to split this project up into episodes, and the first episode is all about the standard gauge engines created by WebW Ordering. That's engines 1 to 11. First, let's talk about some rules I'm following for my take on the Sodor engines. Rule 1. I've noticed that most other YouTube creators just use the versions of the characters from the Railway series or the TV show. I've decided to go further. All engines in my universe are real engines. At some point in history, their bases have existed. No one-off designs, no extra members to a class, and no fictional experimental engines. Rule 2. This is another video about my new Railway series, so we'll be talking about my headcanon. So let's get started by looking at the steam engines on the North Western Railway. First up is the number 1 engine, Thomas the Tank Engine. His origins are the same as the Railway series. Thomas arrived on Sodor in 1915 as one of the engines brought in to help build the main line of the North Western Railway. The Fat Director brought him in 1920 and he became the station pilot at Knapford until he rescued James in 1925, where he was rewarded his famous branch line to Farquhar and his 2 coaches, Annie and Clarabelle. Even if you're not a die-hard Thomas fan, you probably know that Thomas is a London, Brighton and South Coast Railways E2 class, the tank engine that used to work in Brighton docks. In total, 10 of these engines were built, and all have been scrapped, making Thomas the sole surviving member. Working out which of the E2s is Thomas is actually quite easy. All 10 of the E2s were numbered 100 to 109. The last 5 were the ones built with the extended side tanks Thomas has, and only 2 of them were built in 1915, 105 and 106. For my headcanon, Thomas is 105, and then became the number 1 of the NWR. Over the years, the only changes to Thomas were when his front and back running boards were raised up and made flat. This happened after he crashed into the station master's house in 1960. This is still Thomas's present day look, and he's still running on his branch line. Next is the number 2 engine, Edward. His origins are nearly the same as Thomas. He was brought on to help Thomas in building the main line in 1915 and stayed on the railway to help run it. He was then bought in 1921 and became the railway's 2nd engine. He helped out on the main line until he was rewarded the Brendan branch line in 1948. Edward is based on the Furness Railway's K2 class, also known as the larger Seagulls. Only 8 of these engines were ever built, meaning that there were more E2s than K2s. All 8 engines were built before 1915, so Edward could be any of these engines. The first 6 were built in 1896, with the last 2 being built in the 1900s. I like to think that he was the first K2 built, making his first number 21. All the K2s are scrapped today, so Edward is another sole survivor. Some of the few changes the NWR did to Edward was install a cab with windows and give him a Bowler tender. He was also overhauled in 1965 after the events of the story Edward's Exploits, where his whole left side of him was cracked apart. He's still running on the Brendan branch line today, and is still being as reliable as always. The third engine is of course Henry. Henry is the first engine on this list where I need to write a new origin for him. In Audrey's books, Henry was built from drawings stolen from Sir Nigel Gresley at Doncaster in 1919 by an anonymous engine builder. I've done some research and can confirm this isn't true. So instead, my Henry is the prototype of the A1 design, making his original number 4470. In the real world, that makes Henry the GNR Class 1 Great Northern locomotive. Because Henry was the first of the A1s, he had some flaws in his design, most notably his small firebox. The Fat Director was looking for an Atlantic engine for the Express one at the time, but instead he bought Henry at a bargain price. In my universe, Henry was still in his GNR green paintwork when he was shut up in his tunnel. Then he was painted NWR blue, and then became the first engine on Sodor to be painted NWR green. But the biggest change in Henry's life came after his Flying Kipper crash in 1935. He was then rebuilt into an LMS Danube Class 5, better known as the Black Fives. 842 of these tender engines were built, and today there are only 18 left preserved. From my research, I found that the crew work started building the Black Fives in 1935, the same year as Henry's accident, with the numbers 5000 to 5019 and 5070 to 5074. That gives us 25 engines Henry could have been rebuilt into. I've decided to make him one of the later ones and have him be 5072. Fun fact, like Henry, Great Northern was rebuilt into another class of engine, the LNER Thompson Class A1-1 in 1945. I wonder if this was Audrey's inspiration for Henry's story. Speaking of the A1s, let's talk about Gordon. After Henry was bricked up in his tunnel, the Fat Director had to buy another express engine. So he went back to the Doncaster works and bought another A1. He arrived on Sodor in 1923 and became the railway's fourth engine. He soon became Sodor's fastest engine and pulls the Royal Nor'Wester. In total, 79 A1s were built, with 51 of them being rebuilt into A3s. As I'm sure you all know, the only one exists today, the famous Flying Scotsman. I like to think that he was built after the Flying Scotsman. Originally, Gordon was the prototype A1 in the Railway Series universe, but as Henry is now the prototype, we'll need another engine to base Gordon on. In my headcanon, his original number is 4473 and was going to be called Celerio after a racehorse. In the 1940s, he was rebuilt into an A3 design, and in the future, I'd like to do a book that gives Gordon his second tender design from mine, Thomas and Fred's animated series. This also means that technically Gordon and Henry are now brothers. But I believe that after Henry's rebuilt, they've forgotten about this fact. Next, we have a personal favourite of mine, James the Red Engine. James arrived on Sodor in 1925, where he had an accident on his first day due to his wooden brakes. It was then repaired and repainted NWR Red. The first and for some time the only steam engine painted this colour. James is based on a Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Class 28. 105 of these tender engines were built, but none were saved for preservation. The build dates for all these engines are between 1909 and 1912, so James could be any of these engines. So what was James's number before coming to Sodor? Well, in 1923, the locomotives passed into LMS ownership, and their LMS numbers were 12515 to 12619. I think James was one of the later ones, making him still very young when he arrived on the island. So I'm going to say he was 12615. After his accident, James was given some modifications to try and improve some of his class's flaws, including making him a 260 engine with front driving wheels, an extended running board and a Fowler tender. He's now a mixed traffic engine on the main line, but he would rather pull coaches all the time. Next we have the second tank engine to be owned by the NWR, Percy. Percy came to the island in 1934, after Gordon, James and Henry went on strike over Knapford having no pilot engine after Thomas left to run his branch line. He became Knapford's second pilot engine, and until 1955, when he was transferred to Thomas's line to help in the old harbour's reconstruction. He's stayed to help with the goods traffic on Thomas's line since then. Percy is the first engine on this list where we don't know what his basis is. The original illustrations in his first book appearance, Troublesome Engines, doesn't look like any real life engine, but most fans and sources believe that he was built by the Avonside Engine Company of Bristol, mostly because they made the Avonside SS040ST, a small saddle tank engine that nearly looks like Percy. There was only 2 of these engines ever built, making them one of the rarest steam engines in the world. Sorry, always wanted to say that. One of these engines was 1340 Trojan, who ran in GWR service until 1932. She now resides at the Didcot Railway Centre in the UK. Sadly, 1386 Whitehall was cut up for scrap in the 30s. But in my headcanon, he was saved from scrap by the Fact Director, meaning Percy's original number was 1386. He was named by the director, and shortly after coming to Sodor, he was painted NWR green and given his number 6. The only other changes to happen to Percy was when he joined Thomas's line. A bunker was installed to extend the distance Percy could travel. Number 7 belongs to Toby. Toby came to Sodor in 1951, when Thomas was in trouble with the police after breaking a law on the tramway tracks between Farquhar and the quarry, stating that all engines on the tramway must have the covered wheels.
"Everyone will laugh, sir," said Thomas. "They'll say I look like a tram."
When the Fact Director heard, he remembered the tram engine he and his family met on a recent holiday to East Anglia. He bought Toby and he came straight to the island. Since then, he's always worked on Thomas's branch line. Toby is one of the easiest characters to work out on my list, because he is actually a real engine. He's based on a GER Class C53, which later became the LNER J70 class. Wilbur got the inspiration for Toby from a J70 he saw while on holiday with his family. The story, Toby and the Stout Gentleman, was based on his holiday. The engine has had many numbers in its working life. Under GER it was 127, then under LNER was 7127, then renumbered 8221, and then under BR was 68221. 12 J70s were built, and today all of them have been scrapped, making Toby the sole survivor of this class. Toby is unchanged since joining NWR, but now wears a chocolate brown and blue livery. He's still working on the Farquhar branch with his coach Henrietta. Next we have Sodor's 8th engine, Duck. When Percy was sent to work on the harbour, another engine was brought in to take over pilot duties at Knapford in 1955. His name was Montague, but he was nicknamed Duck because others said he waddled. Duck became his new name and he became Knapford's 3rd pilot engine. He is also the first engine to be brought to Sodor by Sir Topham Hatt II, the Fat Controller. He stayed as pilot until he was given his own branch line in 1967, the line which later became known as the Little Western. Duck is based on a 5700 class Pannier tank engine. 863 were built in total and today only 16 are preserved. You think that working out Duck's original number is easy, because we know it. In the books he was 5741. But there's a small problem. We know that Duck was a Swindon's work engine and his previous career was being one of the pannier tanks that worked in Paddington. But the real 5741 never worked at Paddington, it worked in Wales for most of his life. 5741 wasn't even built by the Swindon Works. It was built by the North British Locomotive Company. So I've decided to change his number. I've decided on 4638. Because that was built in Swindon and we have photographic proof that it worked at Paddington. Duck is still painted in his Great Western livery. But unlike the Railway series, he doesn't have his GWR number on his cab sides. He wears the number 8. But I like to think that he keeps his original number plates inside his cab. I also like to think that only the Fat Controller knows that Duck's real name is Montague. I can see why he'll want to keep that a secret. Thomas wouldn't let him hear the end of it. Next we have number 9 and 10 with the Scottish twins Donald and Douglas. Donald and Douglas arrived on Sodor in 1959, but the Fat Controller was only expecting one of them. Talk about buy one get one free. They were worried that if one of them went to Sodor, the other one would be scrapped. So the Fat Controller trialled both of them, and after a deputation by the other engines, he decided to keep both engines on his railway. Today they run goods trains on the main line and pull the ballast trains on the Little Western. You think once again that these two would be easy to work out. We know their basis and their original numbers. But there is a problem. Both of them are based on the Caledonian Railway 812 class. 79 of the 812s were built, and today only one is in preservation. Number 828. I've actually seen this engine when it visited the Spa Valley Railway in Kent. The problem is that Donald and Douglas BR numbers are 57646 and 57647. But the 812 class only went up to 57645, making Donald and Douglas two fictional add-on members to the class. So to follow my rules, I've had to renumber them, but I still like the idea of them being the last two members of the class. So in my headcanon, Donald's BR number is 57644 and Douglas's is 57645. Today they are painted NWR blue and can often be seen double-heading goods trains on the main line. Number 11 belongs to Oliver. Oliver arrived on Sodor in 1967. After escaping from scrap, he made his way all the way to Bowring Furness Yard with Toad the brake van and an auto coach called Isabel, where he met Douglas and he helped him to escape to Sodor. He and his friends were repaired and repainted in Great Western colours. Then they went to work on the Little Western branch line. Oliver helped Duck with the passenger trains with Isabel and another auto coach called Dulcie, while Toad helps Douglas with the ballast trains. Oliver is based on the GWR 1400 class. 75 of them have been built, and today 4 of them are in preservation. As like with Duck, working out his original number should be easy, because we know his number. 1436 was a number that belonged to a 1400 class, but this engine was scrapped in 1958, nearly 10 years before the events of Oliver's story. Even the restored illustrations show Oliver with the number 1420 on his front buffer beams. This number belongs to a preserved member of his class. So for my Oliver, I need to find a 1400 class that was withdrawn in 1967. But the last 2 were withdrawn in 1965. These 2 engines are 1442 and 1450. Both of them are preserved today. So I've decided to make my Oliver one of the last 15 engines to be built in 1936. I've decided on 1471. We don't know when it was withdrawn, but in my headcanon, Oliver was meant to be withdrawn in 1964. But he was placed on a branch line for 3 more years with Isabel, making him the last to be withdrawn in 1967. After that, he then escaped to Sodor. During those 3 years, he was painted BR dark green, but he was restored to his GWR livery with the number 11 on his cab side. And that's it for part 1. Next time we'll be looking at the standard gauge steam engines that I introduced in my new railway series, numbers 12 to 22. If you see any mistakes in my research, please do say. I welcome feedback and your opinion. Part 2 will be out in about 2 to 4 weeks. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.